Welcome. So today we're going to dive into one of the darkest chapters in world history. It's the Middle Passage and the system of what we call chattel slavery in America. It's the forced movement of millions of Africans across the Atlantic Ocean, and it shaped economies, societies, and generations for the world to come. So let's explore the impact it had. First, I want to understand the Middle Passage. It was a brutal voyage of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean, and it was part of what we call the triangular trade system, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Ships were packed with hundreds of captives. They endured a treacherous journey that lasted 2 to 3 months, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Conditions were horrific, and diseases spread rampantly. Aquina, a survivor, said, the closeness of the place was so intolerable that it was difficult for me to breathe. The shrieks of women and the groans of the dying made it a whole scene of horror, almost inconceivable. This journey was a nightmare, but it was just the beginning of life in bondage. The Middle Passage was part of a larger economic system called the triangular trade. European ships first traveled to Africa, trading goods like guns and textiles for enslaved peoples. Then those ships would cross the Atlantic, what we call the Middle Passage, transporting captives to the Americas. Finally, ships returned to Europe loaded with things like sugar, tobacco, and cotton, grown through the labor of enslaved peoples. This trade system fueled immense wealth for European merchants and American colonists, but it devastated African communities and tore apart families and forced millions into a life of brutal exploitation. During the Middle Passage, life on these ships was horrific. Captives were packed shoulder to shoulder. They were chained together with little food, water, or fresh air. Disease would spread rapidly. Many didn't survive the journey. Enslaved people were forced to exercise on deck in a practice known as dancing, meant to keep them strong enough to sell. Despite these conditions, resistance was constant. Some captives attempted rebellions, while others chose self liberation, freeing themselves by jumping overboard, refusing to live in bondage. Think about that. Once in America, enslaved people faced a system unlike anything else in world history, chattel slavery. Sure, slavery has been around, since basically mankind. However, chattel slavery was different. This meant that these people were treated as property with no rights or freedoms. There are three key features that made it especially brutal. One, it was hereditary. Children born to enslaved mothers were automatically enslaved. Two, it was permanent. There was no escape from the system. And three, it was racially based, specifically targeting African people. Colonial laws reinforced this system, ensuring its survival for generations. The legacy of chattel slavery shaped American history. The Middle Passage and chattel slavery were horrific institutions built on the suffering of millions. But the story doesn't end there. Enslaved people resisted, fought, and ultimately contributed to shaping the nation sought to deny their humanity. We'll take a look at what those people did and what the abolitionists who came to help them did. Understanding this history helps us recognize its lasting impact, and we must continue to learn from it.